The past few years have seen an explosion of so-called clean eating, the paleo diet, low carb with high protein, or eating gluten-free. Indeed, what we eat is now firmly in the public consciousness, and those diets, for some, are a way of life, even dogma. Nipissing University professor Gillian McCann argues that people are transferring to food the values they would typically find in religion: purity, ethics, goodness. And she joins us now for more. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
Thanks for making the trip down from North Bay. You recently spoke at a conference, I guess in Ottawa, on the connection between food movements and religion. And I guess I want to start with what made you put those two things together in the first place?
I was in my kitchen, and I live among vegans, and we were skirmishing a bit about the fridge and who puts food where, and I could feel that my food was offensive.
Your food meaning?
Well, dairy. And it's interesting because I just want to say I speak as an insider. I'm a vegetarian. I'm part of a lot of these movements. So it's interesting to me to see that there's also a hierarchy within the larger movement.
And what was the hierarchy you were seeing in your own fridge?
That veganism is seen as more pure. And that immediately led me to think of food rules, like sort of kosher food rules, or almost like you need a separate fridge for the impure food.
Gotcha. And did you find that reasonable or unreasonable?
I'm still, I don't know.
You're mad.
Because I, in turn, if someone put meat in my fridge, I'd be uncomfortable, right? So, yeah, we're skirmishing.
Interesting. What values do you see food movements and religions sharing?
I think they both share an interest in goodness, in the body, in purity, in things like virtue and ethics. And I think we've largely drummed those out of the public sphere, so they're coming in a sort of an alternative way, I think.
So what's the appeal of putting those things that we've drummed out of the public sphere into what we put inside our bodies?
I don't know if it's completely conscious. I think some of this is coming in kind of unconsciously because it's not being expressed in other ways. So I think it's, for a lot of people, it's coming in unconsciously.
There's a StatsCan study. I'm just going to read you a little excerpt of this now because, well, you'll see. It'll speak to what you were just referring to. In 2001, roughly 16% of Canada's population identified as having no religious affiliation. In 2011, a decade later, that shot up to nearly 1/4 of the country. And I wonder whether you see any link between food movements and the rise in secularism.
Yes, absolutely. A number of sociologists over 100 years ago talked about the idea that our society is becoming highly bureaucratized. It's based on technology and so on, and so we're losing this sense of enchantment. And I personally believe that's a necessary part of life. So people are trying to sort of re-enchant their life, and this is one way that I think it's happening, to try to create a healthier relationship to food and how we get our food.
One way or the most significant way?
It's the one that seems to be hot, because I have to tell you, people aren't usually interested in my research. So the fact that I'm being contacted, I was like, okay, there's something going on, that this is a very hot issue.
You like it? But this sort of added emphasis on food and how it may mirror religion?
I think it can be problematic because it's traditionally issues around diet and the body are in a constellation of belief, but this puts so much weight on the body that I think it can move into a kind of almost, I don't want to overstate, but a kind of narcissism and obsession with one's body and one's health. And I don't think that that's particularly helpful, because my question would be, even if you're pure and you're healthy, then what? You know, it's not about that. So if from a religious point of view, it's about how you live your life. It's not just about your body,
sure,
right?
I think I'm right in saying this. If you're going to be an adherent of a religion, there's a certain discipline that goes along with that. You mentioned kosher food a moment ago, so some Jews don't eat certain foods that they think are kosher. I mean, there's a list of, depending on how you count them, either 10 commandments that we're supposed to follow. Do you see this kind of discipline transferring itself into the food movement as well?
Yes, absolutely.
And how so?
I think this is part of a larger project that I'm working on, of sort of what's been lost in losing religion. And religion is all about limitations and telling you what you can and cannot do. And I think we're a culture that doesn't like that. We don't want to be told. But there's something very intrinsic in human beings. They know they need that. So I think some of this is a very healthy impulse to want to have a regimen, to want to have some structure in life. whether it's juicing or it's running, or I think these are all kind of sort of ascetic disciplines that used to be connected to a higher spiritual goal, but now they're completely separated out.
So now that we're not into God as much as we once were, we're looking for an alternative, and it's food. I don't mean to be flippant about it.
I think that's an overstatement.
Okay.
But I think that's one way that it's coming. That impulse is coming forward.
Have you found something about food in particular that causes some of us to apply a kind of a moral value to it?
Well, I think because it has to do with the body. And the human body has always been the site of moral discourse. And we might not think about it, but we're embodied. That's the law impacts upon us physically and so on. So food rules always have to do with the body. So the body is always a site of kind of moral argument of what's good, what's bad, what you can and cannot do. And I think it's just a continuation of that.
What's that line? Our body is our temple?
Yes.
I mean, there's the religious allegory right there.
Yes, that's from the Bible.
Is the focus on what's on our plate, do you think, a conscious obsession?
Not usually. And I think that's, and again, I think some of the response I'm getting is because people are feeling there's something too charged about it. So the example I used in my paper was, I call it the demon gluten. That somehow suddenly gluten's become the great enemy. It causes cancer, it causes Alzheimer's. It's the reason for all bad things that happen. And so I think there's a recognition that this is too extreme. So what's really going on here? But I just wanted to say, I'm not like Caulfield. There's a few of them who have been writing on this and in The Atlantic. And I'm not saying we should just be objective and we should listen to scientists. I'm not saying that. I think this is something human beings do. Our body is a site of metaphor, and I think that's very normal.
Do food movements create an us versus them dynamic?
It can, because purity does that. And there's an amazing work by Mary Douglas called Purity and Danger. She's an anthropologist, and she talks about how purity rules always create an us and a them. So the pure people are the good, virtuous people, and the people outside are not. So I think one has to always be careful of that. And I've said before, I try to be self-reflective about that, because you get into sanctimony and self-righteousness, just the way religious people do, right?
Sure. But presumably this doesn't include those people who are just eating healthy because they want to be healthy, or they've got an allergy to a particular food. Or no, they're outside this mix.
But I mean, it's been shown that more and more people think they're allergic. So then I ask myself, what's really going on there? And I think there's some sense that we have dysfunctional food systems, and people want to, and I'm part of this, I want to get back to farmers markets, knowing farmers, knowing who brings my food to me. You know, I think those are very healthy impulses.
You mentioned The Atlantic a second ago, and you're probably referring to The Gluten Lie, which was this piece that Alan Levinovitz did. And let me just read an excerpt of this. He said, myth is great for talking about where everything came from, or what happens after you die, or whether there was something before nothing. We don't have great scientific accounts for these things. I think there are religious narratives that help people deal with really important but as yet unanswerable questions, but myth is terrible for dietary rules. You want to comment on that?
Yes, I don't agree with him at all. I think we live in myth, we live in story, we live in narrative, and we often aren't even aware of it. We're always doing that. So I think it's a kind of a false argument to say that we have to get rid of that. And I think it goes back to this idea that religious people are crazy, irrational fanatics, so we need to get rid of that and bring this objective knowledge in. I don't think there's any such thing. I think we all live within our metaphor, whatever it is.
Well, the first, I guess, significant choice that humans had to make once upon a time was whether it had to do with food, right?
Yes, it did.
Adam and Eve, should we eat that apple?
Yes.
So this is not new.
No, no. And you can see this across religions. In Hinduism, Jainism, what you eat is a very important marker of what community you belong to. It determines how you socialize. So it's a very important practice. And I think it's also speaking to disordered relationship to eating. I mean, there's a number of sociologists that have looked at the fact that we're not seeing people eating together anymore. Often people are eating alone, watching television. I had one journalist talking to me, said, you know, we don't have Sunday or Friday dinner anymore where the extended family gets together. So I think food has become a real site of looking at ways that our culture is dysfunctional in certain ways.
Do you believe that people who are searching for that kind of spiritual fulfillment that we've been talking about can actually find it in food?
Not just in food. I think it's a doorway in, but I think you hit a kind of dead end if that's the only way that you're looking at it. So even if it was purely secular, we were talking about this at the conference, you need to see it as part of a larger movement that you're in. not just your own personal regimen. But from a religious point of view, it needs to be part of a much larger palette of behaviors and beliefs.
Gotcha. You're onto something here, aren't you?
I don't know.
I think you are. I think you are.
Okay.
Well,
Thank
listen,
you.
media are calling you, aren't they?
Yes.
There you go. Gillian McCann, we're really grateful you took the time to come down from North Bay and help us out with this tonight.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you very much.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit supporttvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.